Welcome to our second season of Careers in STEAM. Our guest today is Raahul Ravi. He graduated from Troy High School in 2017 and majored in biomedical engineering at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He's also worked on My Auto O2, a medtech startup focused on oxygen delivery, titration, and weaning in hospitals. Raahul now works as a senior analyst at Roivant Health in New York. Hi, Raahul. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, like you mentioned, I was on 226 from 2013 to 2017, then went on to the University of Michigan, where I studied biomedical engineering, did my undergrad and my master's degree there before moving out to New York, and have worked at Roivant Sciences for the past 2.5, 3 years now, currently working at Roivant Health, where we're looking to build out new healthcare and health tech startups from the ground up.
Could you describe us your role on 2 to 6 and what you have learned from it?
Yeah, of course. So I think I started on the programming team when I first joined the team as a freshman, and then stuck around on the programming team through my time on 226. Was always pretty interested in learning how to code, did bits and pieces of it before joining the team, and thought it was a pretty cool skill set to have. Um, Once I think I became a sophomore or junior, joined the drive team as well. So along with a couple close friends, was a driver of the robot at competitions during the season and during the off seasons as well. And being a driver on 226 was probably my favorite time or favorite activity that I was doing as part of the team. It was really fun to be a part of the competitive experience. Competition day was always a really big moment, and the ramp up and build season and things like that to getting into competition day was really fun as well.
What's your most memorable moment on 226?
My most memorable moment is probably my last year on the team. Like I mentioned, I was the driver of the robot, and I think we were still in St. Louis for World Champs at the time. So we got to go to Champs and driving on the field during playoffs and elims in the middle of what used to be the Rams Stadium was a pretty surreal experience. Got to meet tons of folks there as well, from all different teams, both in and around Michigan, but also around the world. And something I look back on pretty frequently as a really, really good time.
So, how did your experience on the team influence your choice in your major?
So I always knew I wanted to go into some kind of engineering or technical degree. I was part of some of the more junior first programs before I joined 226, like FLL and things like that. But I was always kind of toying with the idea of going into medical school or getting a PhD or something like that in life sciences. So biomedical engineering seemed like a pretty good fit right in the middle. To be honest, I didn't know what the degree meant when I signed up for it my freshman year, and pretty quickly fell in love with it. I think it's a good balance between a lot of the technical aspects you learn in robotics and in other STEM fields or engineering fields. But you get to take classes like biochemistry and physiology and pathology and things like that. And it was a very interesting mix. Yeah.
What would you say your favorite part of biomedical engineering and all of that? What is your favorite part of your major and what you chose?
Hmm. Good question. I think my favorite part of my major was some of the practical courses that we got to do, like the lab courses and design courses and things like that. It's structured into the curriculum where I went to school, so we would do things like design implants for patients for their femur and for the shoulder joint and things like that, or design like brain implants for deep brain stimulation, which is pretty crazy to think as like a 18, 20-year old that I was doing those kinds of things, that they were not that far off from how they exist in industry. So it was generally very intellectually stimulating, but also knowing that things you're building are like you get to work with patients and you get to work with doctors when you're building these things, and you can actually go and see the impact on these people when you're trying to build these things, especially in courses like your senior capstone where you're working with a clinician at the university hospital. So it feels very rewarding to work on those kinds of projects, and that was probably my favorite part.
So, what are some opportunities for people who major in biomedical engineering other than prosthetics?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different fields. One of the big areas, at least in from the University of Michigan and also from a lot of schools in the Midwest, is that folks go into medical device companies in industry. So these are companies like Johnson & Johnson, GE, Stryker, Becton Dickinson, folks like that who are making surgical devices, medical instruments, all kinds of things like that. Another big field for folks who go into biomedical engineering, if you want to go into industry like I did, is go to work in life sciences. So this is like biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies, research labs, things like that, where you're working more on the drug side or like the biotechnology side. But industry is only, I would say, it's a pretty decent chunk of folks who go into biomedical engineering, but it's not all of them. Like I mentioned, a lot of folks who I studied with, even in the program, would go on to medical school or grow on to graduate school where they did their PhDs in BME or other similar fields. A couple of them even go on to law school to be like biotech patent lawyers and things like that. So it's a pretty diverse field, and you can kind of make of it what you want, I would say.
Do you work towards any goals, any overall overarching kind of projects in biomedical engineering? What kind of work do you guys do?
Yeah, so I can use the senior capstone as kind of an example. So for most of the pretty large projects that you do, these can often be semester-long or even year-long projects. Like in my master's, it was a year-long design course. And you're typically tasked with solving some kind of medical problem that exists up front. So you have to go out and do a bunch of research and find out who's being affected by this problem, what their main pain points are, what really you can build to fix that. And then you go through a full design build test cycle where you sketch out your entire problem, design it in software tools that a lot of robotics students are familiar with, like AutoCAD and things like that. And then you go and iterate and test on it. And a lot of that is a little different than things like robotics because you're trying to see how it's fitting into a physician's workflow or a researcher's workflow or a patient's workflow or something like that. So it's a lot more, I guess, like end user testing and customer discovery when you're talking to people like that. But at the end of these longer projects, you often present your final recommendation, present your design, present your prototype. And often tools like these can actually go on to be used at the hospital. It's pretty, I wouldn't say it's like common, but it's not uncommon that things that university students make in biomedical engineering projects, that last a semester or a year, go on to be patented, go on to be formed a company around, and are actually sold and used by physicians in the real world every day, which is pretty rewarding.
So how do you see the biotech industry evolve in the next 5-10 years, especially in the context of biomedical advancements?
Yeah, good question. I think one of the biggest things that I've paid more attention to, I think, over the past couple of years, I've spent more time in the life sciences arena, in biopharma and biotech and things like that, than medical devices. And I think the growing number of cell and gene therapies that are in later stages of clinical development at biotech companies or pharma companies, they're in phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials. A lot of these drugs are going to come to market and be able to cure pretty debilitating diseases that have to date been left relatively unaddressed or are just symptom slap a band-aid on a symptom for the most of their care. A lot of these drugs can be transformative and cure entire populations. They can also be extremely expensive. They can also be extremely difficult to administer, manufacture. So I think this is probably one of the larger waves, I would say, in the biotech industry that we're still at the very early stages of. And 5, 10, 15 years from now, I'm hoping that they'll become much more common.
What other organizations and things were you a part of in college?
So I was part of a healthcare kind of like a pitch competition / startup incubator in college that was called Sling Health. I think it's got maybe a dozen or 2 dozen chapters at different universities around the company, but they kind of pair you up with different students from around the university, whether they're in your degree, but also other engineering fields or health sciences fields or MBAs or law students or med students, residents, really, you name it. Anyone who's focused on healthcare innovation can participate. And you work together to come up with a business that you can pitch and a product that you can prototype and pitch and get funding from angel investors and then hopefully go out and make it a reality. So this was something that I participated in my junior year of college, or my third year, and got a chance to work with a lot of folks who are much more talented and much more experienced than I was at the time. They were actually treating patients and building businesses in their careers before they came to Michigan. And we built a pretty cool business focused on automated oxygen titration for emergency departments and for COPD patients. Ended up winning that year, got a teeny bit of funding, and tried making it a reality the next year before all of us kind of went our different ways after we graduated. But very, very cool experience. Highly recommend folks looking into organizations like Sling Health or Sling Health itself if you're interested in that kind of thing.
So, how did you find your idea of My Auto O2? Like, why did you choose to go with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when our team got together, we didn't have any specific ideas. I think we were looking in an entirely different arena before one of our team members, who was, I think, an M3 at the time at Michigan Med School, wanted to go into anesthesia, was pretty interested in oxygen titration at the time, and saw this as a pain point himself as a med student who was on rotations in the emergency department, and got to talking with some of the attendings that he worked with, some of the residents that he worked with, and we found that it's a relatively simple problem that had really no solution, and we jumped on it pretty quickly at that point. I think the importance of the problem and the actual ability for us, a team of students, to whip something together in a lab and actually understand a business around it made it such that it was attractive enough of a problem that we felt connected to, that we could go out and solve.
For the Sling Health thing, that project that you did, you mentioned oxygen titration. Was that one of the things that helped lead you towards My Auto O2 project?
Yeah, exactly. So that project really spun out of Sling Health, and we ended up calling it, I think, Auto 2 or My Auto 2, and worked on it for about a year afterwards. Attempted packaging it into an actual business, attempted raising some funds, didn't end up working out. Folks had a little bit too many things on their time, and also it was a challenging thing to do while everyone was still in school. But I think that's how these experiences go. It's a very, very tumultuous ride, but also like you learn so very much from doing things like that. So that really came out of that 1 year within the program, and then, like I mentioned, like we tried pulling it out and doing our own thing outside.
So, what company do you currently work for, and what do you do?
So I work for Roivant Sciences. Roivant is a biotech company that takes a relatively innovative model. We look for drug candidates that are at different pharma companies or biotech companies, and the drug candidate that's in clinical trials is on the shelf. It's not really has any plans to go to market, but we think we see kind of a differentiated way we can pursue that drug development and acquire it from those companies and then do the development from there onwards. The team that I work in at Roivant Sciences is called Roivant Health. We take a relatively similar approach to the biotech stuff, but more on the broader healthcare and health tech side. So my job is essentially working as a senior analyst within a healthcare startup incubator. Funny enough, not too thematically different from some of the work that I was doing in college, but our job is really to create new healthcare startups that, address large patient populations and solve a lot of the pain points that pharma companies or insurance companies or doctors or patients face, and grow and scale those businesses from there.
What does a typical day at that job look like with you?
So I think at any given time in my job, I'm usually working on one core incubation idea, either by myself, depending on the project, or with a direct manager of mine. And a typical day-to-day actually can vary a lot depending on the scope of the project. If the business that we're looking to create is really early stage, it can be a lot of early validation work. This is things like going and finding out if the problem is actually real, like what are the pain points that the stakeholder that we're trying to solve something for really are? How big are these pain points? Are they things that we can realistically solve? If it's a little later stage, it can be a lot more operational work. So this is things like standing up the tech stack and the infrastructure for the business. It can be designing and implementing the care model. It can be staffing and hiring the team that's going to go lead this business. It can be fundraising work to try and get investment money from venture capitalists or private equity firms or other investment firms to fund these businesses. And it can be a lot of support work as well for the businesses that we've already launched that need some kind of operational support as they go on. So it's pretty varied. the things that it has in common are it's very, I guess, like early stage work, a little bit akin to working at an early stage startup, but kind of at a more like big picture level because we're working on a couple different businesses at a time. But it can be pretty diverse from day to day.
So you mentioned that some of your friends went into law or like they got into med school. Why did you choose to work at Roivant Health?
Yeah, so when I was, I think between my third and fourth years of school, I was pretty set on going to work at a medical device company. I think the company I was going to work for, I don't actually remember its name, but it was a diagnostics company based somewhere in the Midwest. And then COVID happened, and the company wasn't able to hire anybody, as pretty much every organization was at the time. So I started looking for other opportunities for that summer and ended up working for a venture capital firm that instead of building medical devices, they invested in medical device startups. So I joined that company and was working for them for a couple months that summer between, I think it's summer 2020. And a lot of my work is focused on investing in early stage robotic surgery startups and surgical navigation startups, which is an area that I didn't really know very much about, but was very, very interested in. And that experience of, I guess, like more business side of healthcare and life sciences was something that I didn't know I liked up until that point and found I really, really enjoyed doing that kind of work. I already decided a few years back that medical school or graduate school outside of a master's was not really for me. So I was looking for the right spots in industry and then realized that that kind of work is pretty similar to the kind of work I would be able to do at Roivant. So I joined Roivant post-grad as part of a 2-year rotational program where they hire kids out of school to do 4 6-month rotations in different departments or different subsidiary companies that we've launched, and then ended up coming to Roivant Health during one of my rotations, and I've stuck around ever since.
Now that you work at Roivant Health, do you still work on that business type investment in good ideas and good projects, or do you mostly take projects that already exist and try to make them better? What part of the engineering process do you typically do?
Yeah, good question. I would say more of the work that I do is is on the early stage. So we focus a lot on idea generation and idea validation rather than taking an existing idea and seeing if we can run with it. I think other companies or other types of businesses like investment firms will look at companies in the wild and say, oh, they're working on something really cool. Can we fund it? Can we help them grow? Can we scale it? Versus a lot of the work that I do is looking at companies and looking at what's happening in the healthcare ecosystem and saying, okay, these things are this way. Let's see if we can build something new in this stage. So it's much more in the early stages of validation, in the early stages, kind of the engineering design cycle. As projects can ramp up, they go a lot further down and further into the kind of testing and deployment phases, but that's a little bit rarer.
So how do you find these projects when they're like in their starting phase?
Yeah, so projects can usually come from a couple different areas. One is that given that my team sits within a broader biotech company, a lot of the work that folks sitting next to us are doing is developing drugs. They're discovering new medicines, they're putting them through clinical trials, they're commercializing those drugs. So we see a lot of the pain points that a vast majority of the life sciences industry faces on a day-to-day basis, literally sitting next door to us. So a lot of the ideas we can have come from our own internal experiences as a company when we see some of the inefficiencies that exist in drug development and commercialization. Some of our other ideas can come from our experience with the market or with external stakeholders. So this can either be in our interactions with other companies, our interactions with big healthcare organizations like health systems, hospitals, academic centers, insurance companies, device manufacturers. Like when we go speak to them, when we learn about what it is that they're doing, their pain points, some of our ideas can come from there. And then lastly, our ideas can come from our own previous work. Like say we're working on some kind of business build, and then we decide, if only we were doing things differently in XYZ areas, that can lead us to an entirely new project that's a sister project to that, or that's the future continuation of that project. That's probably where most of our ideas come from.
What would you say the most challenging part of finding these ideas and elaborating on them is?
Interesting. I think the most challenging part of finding these ideas is deciding if they are A, worth it for us to spend a bunch of time working on, and B, are something we're truly able to do something about. I think a lot of challenges in healthcare, there's an uncountable number of challenges in healthcare, and I'm only a couple years in my career, and I'm starting to realize that now. So not all challenges are built for a startup or a small lean company to be able to tackle. Some of them need to happen on the policy level. Some of them need to happen on the regulatory level. Some of them need to happen just to change the ways massive multi-hundred-billion-dollar organizations need to act to help influence and improve care. So deciding if those ideas are something that we can actually tackle is a big part of those ideas. And then the first thing I mentioned is deciding if the idea is good enough for something we look across. I think we try to build businesses that can have as large of an impact on as many people as possible. So that often means we have to make decisions around some of the ideas that we come across and decide we just can't do enough in this area, and it won't be able to reach as many people as we can, which leads us towards a kind of winding path towards different ideas.
So you mentioned that there are going to be like a bunch of companies. So how do you specifically know which one will be the right one to like work on?
It's a good question. So I think if we see an idea, the couple key things that we think about if we decide if it's right for us is one, is it in the right kind of strengths that we have? Some of the strengths that we have as an organization are, we have a large wealth of experience in life sciences internally. We have a large network of folks in life sciences that we can help tap to either be customers or users or advisors or supporters of the business we're building. I think the second one is it something that we can iterate and test on very quickly to learn a lot? I think something my team tries not to do is go slowly in anything we're doing. I think we try to move as quickly as we can and fail as quickly as we can. So if it's an idea that we're not going to be able to get signal on, whether if it's good or bad, for 6 months or 12 months or 2 years, it's probably not the right idea for us. Whereas if we can get to a low fidelity version of an answer on if it's the right idea for us in a matter of weeks or a matter of short months, then it's probably more like something that we can go after.
It feels kind of like a gambling type situation, very high risk, high reward. Have there ever been any times where you've invested in something and found that, oh, maybe it didn't work out? And if there have been, what have you done after that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say less so on something we've invested in that hasn't worked out, but more like there are so many more ideas that don't pan out than there are ideas that we end up going forward with. And you're totally right. It's like working in early stage businesses and startups is a very high risk, high reward kind of scenario. I think some of the benefits we have is that we sit within a larger organization that's helping us with resources that makes it a little bit less risky than if you're just an entrepreneur in the wild trying to build a business on yourself. But when an idea doesn't work out or when a project doesn't work out, some of the things we like to do, and I think we should be doing, is have a kind of post-mortem discussion where we meet with our team that's worked on the idea. We break down and analyze what it is that we did at each step, if they were the right decisions that we made, and how we could have either gotten to a no decision sooner or how we could have turned a no decision into a yes decision if it was something we could have done. I think it's very rare that an idea we worked on that we ended up shelving could have been a success if we had just spent more time or did different things. But often there are ways to get to that no decision much more quickly than we spent on them. So those postmortem discussions and kind of lessons learned from those activities, I think, are really important.
So currently with COVID-19 kind of coming back, are there any new things coming up that you think could like combat that?
Interesting. Do you mean from a medicine perspective, a technology perspective, a societal perspective? What
I think from a biomedical perspective, as Pfizer recently came out with a drug that kind of combats the symptoms for COVID-19.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think COVID cases are, I mean, this is an uninformed opinion of someone who knows very little about public health policy, but if COVID cases stick around and COVID continues to be a disease that mutates and grows, and as it seems like it probably is, more and more people need to get vaccinated, and people need to get vaccinated in ways that all public health vaccine campaigns have tried to use in the past. So as much as we can normalize like getting a triple booster with all the diseases that you need, or all the vaccines that you need in one shot, that becomes routine. That's one way to fight it. I think a lot of the kind of symptom support is also really important because, as we know, COVID disproportionately impacts folks who are either very young or very old, who have weakened immune systems. And a lot of the medicines that have come out to support people like that with symptom management has been really impactful. But I would say it's probably more of a public health issue, like getting as many people to take their vaccines, and not just like marketing to them to get them to take their vaccines, but trying to deliver them and make them accessible to patients in new, innovative ways, I think is pretty important.
Do you mostly work on things like drugs, vaccines, mostly medicines to help people get better? Or do you ever work on things such as prosthetics or replacements for bodies, like functions that need to be replaced?
Good question. So we actually work on a little bit of a different area than both of those, but I think the broader part of our business focuses more on medicines like therapeutics and drugs, immunological drugs, dermatology drugs, things like that. The things that my team focuses on is more like software businesses or tech businesses that we can build. So these are ways that can we help better automate and make a doctor's job more efficient, or can we help get a patient easier and cheaper financial access to some of their medical care or some of their, the drugs they have to pay for? Can we make an insurance process for a patient trying to get a drug faster, easier, more seamless? Can we speed up the time it takes for a pharmaceutical company to put a medicine through clinical trials? So if it is valuable, effective, and safe medicine, it gets to patients much more quickly. So we build mostly software and services business that deal with those things. I think in the past, we've toyed with ideas like medical technology, like hardware devices and things, which was a soft spot in my heart because I spent a lot of time working on medical technology in college. But we mostly stick to the former in software and services.
So how do you guys actually do the process? Like when I mean do the process, I mean like how do you come up with your idea and how do you execute it?
Yeah, so I think in the earliest stage, so say we're presented with some kind of learning in the space, we have some idea about something that we could use to improve a drug development process. We'll usually have someone spend about 6 weeks going out and validating if that learning is actually true. So this can be a lot of research on the industry, like desktop research, Googling and looking in databases and things like that. This can be a lot of key opinion leader or subject matter expert conversations where we talk to people who have spent careers in the field and get their opinions on it and see if we're validated. And this can also be a little bit of kind of financial analysis or market analysis to see what are the ways we can really quantify this problem. If we decide the problem is real and the problem is something that is significant enough and relevant enough to us, we'll look at different types of business ideas that we can come up with to solve that. So this often starts with some kind of pretty big brainstorming activity where we throw all ideas, good, bad, and ugly, on a wall and see what kind of sticks. What sticks is usually we'll whittle down the ideas to see if there are things that we can build, kind of like I mentioned earlier, like things that we can test pretty quickly, things we can iterate on pretty quickly, things that represent a large enough market or a large enough patient or provider population or something like that to us. And then narrow down and define what that business really is and what that business model really is. After that process, we'll have some kind of informal or like go, no go decision where we'll say, is this something that we want to spend 6 months working on and put into a business and fund and find the right executives and build the technology for, or is it not for us? If it's a yes, it leads to a much more dedicated effort to really go and stand that up. So that standing up work can be a lot of like product building. So this is either building technology in-house or getting a bunch of different vendors together and stitching them together with technology we built in-house. This can be some early sales work and partnerships work to find people to partner with us and pilot the technology that we've used for 6 months or a year or something at some kind of low cost to see if it works. This can be some executive acquisition where we try and find a CEO or a CTO or a CMO or something to come and lead that business. And it usually ends with, if we have high conviction that this is something that we can build that can impact a lot of people and make a genuine difference, leads to some kind of funding where we'll put some kind of cash into the business to help sustain it for the next year or a couple of years, and support it from that point on with its leadership team. That's sort of what the process looks like from the beginning to the end.
Overall, you said just all of this. What do you think your favorite part of the process and the industry, all of this, is?
I think my favorite, so probably two answers for that. My favorite part for the process is that getting to work on all of these different parts means that you're just learning constantly. I knew next to nothing about this before I joined my team, both the process of building early stage businesses and trying to make them successful, and also I knew very, very little about the healthcare industry overall. I still know very little about the healthcare industry overall, is what I would say. And there's a lot more to learn, but working in a job like this has let me learn quite a bit every single day that I'm working on my current project or new projects as they crop up. And then my favorite part. Sorry, what was the other part of the question? Favorite part of process?
The overall industry, the things you do in this industry, the things you create.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of working in like healthcare and life sciences is that, one, it's very, just, this is gonna be really nerdy, but it's just very intellectually stimulating to me. I think it's cool to think about problems that people haven't really figured these out yet. Like, a lot of life sciences is people trying to understand things that we know way more than we did 10 years ago or 50 years ago, but there's so much more to figure out. It's definitely not something that people know everything about yet. So it's cool to kind of work on that leading edge. And it's also really interesting to work in an area where you see like tangible impact, like speaking to patients who are being served by the businesses we create, or trying to help get them their care or make it cheaper or make it better, has a very, very direct impact, especially for people who have lived experience in the healthcare system here. It can be pretty challenging otherwise. So it's been quite interesting and pretty impactful as well.
So what advice do you have for people who are now trying to find their own major and career planning?
I would say no one's going to take this advice, but it's going to be like, don't stress about it too much, at least when you're at the very beginning of your undergrad career or even before that. You won't really know what it is that you until you try a bunch of stuff. So like, take as many crazy classes as you can your first semester or first year. Take a class that sounds ridiculous. I think I took a food science cooking class with someone my first year and led to a lot of fun experiences. So like, try different things out and don't expect that you know what it is until you get there, because inevitably what you're interested in will look a little bit different than what you think it did before. That said, like, have a good plan for what you like. Give yourself some time to figure things out, but don't let yourself kind of spiral for too long, and have a backstop, and things will work out. That was my experience, at least.
Do you think there was anything as a part of the robotics team or as part of 226 and FRC that you think kind of led you towards this path? And what do you think anyone who is interested in biomedical engineering on the robotics team could do to help get in a job like this?
Yeah, I absolutely think things like, if I was not part of 226, I mean, robotics in general is fantastic. 226 was a great experience, and I'm sure you guys are doing great things now. But getting to work on very, very challenging problems that other 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds are not really doing is a very interesting experience. And doing it in such a compressed timeline and going and competing on them, like, that aspect of competition and speed and working on technical problems, I think is very translatable to what I was doing in school, and also translatable in different ways to what I'm doing now. I don't think I'd be doing this job if I wasn't on 226 or in robotics growing up. For folks who are interested in biomedical engineering in high school or in robotics, I would say try out some of the like healthcare and life science related clubs if you have any of them in your high school. If you don't have any of them, see if there are organizations that you can reach out to and get involved in, or start a chapter of, or jump in with your local group or something like that, and learn about as much as you can what the industry looks like. Like, what are the companies that are working in the space? What do they really do? Talk to people who work at these companies and find out if it's interesting to you. I absolutely promise you, if you shoot someone a cold email, like from LinkedIn or from just your friends and family's network or something like that who works in an interesting field in life sciences or healthcare, they're pretty likely to say yes, especially if it's coming from a motivated, interested high school student. That's a level of, I think, just go-getterness, whatever the term is, that most students don't really have. So try and learn as much as you can about what it looks like in the real world and see if it's for you. And if it's not, there's, like I mentioned, there's so many different areas within biomedical engineering that if you don't like one, there's bound to be something that you'll like.
So in high school, did you do any health science related clubs like HOSA? Did that exist in 2017?
Now you're really making me feel. It definitely did exist. I think I was part of HOSA in 2015 and 16, my sophomore and junior years. I was part of HOSA and a couple other clubs. Biology competition club. We had gosh, there were a couple others. But orgs like that are pretty cool to get your foot in the door and understand what it is that's going on. So join them, try them out. There's really no downside, I think, to trying out these clubs, even if you stick around for a month and decide it's not for you.
Yeah. Overall, yeah, do you have any other advice for any high school students, any robotics students? Any other things you want to say?
Enjoy it. I think robotics is a fantastic experience, and you'll have memories that last you for very, very long. Some of my closest friends in my life were people that I met through robotics and spent every day with. So put as much into it as you think you feasibly can, and you'll get pretty cool things out of it. That's really it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
you guys.
And to all our viewers, make sure to tune in next week. We're going to be interviewing software engineer and 226 alumni Shreya Shah.